Welcome back, pilots. Today I'm flying out of Minden, Nevada with Philip Lee, aka Orange Pants on YouTube. The forecast looks pretty good today, with cloud bases up to 18,000 feet, although it's going to be blue in the beginning until we connect with the clouds to the south. Our plan is to fly south on the Sierras for as long as we can, then head out northeast to around the Austin area. We're thinking it's going to be about an 800-kilometer day. Our first climb is short and weak, so I head directly south to Mount Siegel, hoping to find another climb along the way. It was a long, dead glide to Mount Siegel, but just before I get there I scratched 400 feet out of another weak thermal. That wasn't quite enough to get me on top of the mountain, so I fly along the upwind side of Mount Siegel, hoping for some ridge lift. The wind isn't really strong enough yet, but I managed to gain just enough altitude to get above the ridge. I hook into a weak but turbulent thermal. Since I'm not very high above the ground, I need to keep my speed up. This will help prevent a stall triggered by the turbulent conditions, but it makes it much harder to climb in this weak thermal. Once I get to a more comfortable height above the mountain, I can slow down and tighten my circle. I continue to pick up a few hundred feet here and there until I finally get into a decent thermal. It's about 12:30 now. Once we top out on this climb, we'll have the altitude to reach the clouds to the south. This is a fairly common scenario flying out of Minden. It'll be blue until you reach the clouds around Mount Patterson. I always like flying over Mount Patterson. It's really beautiful when it's speckled with snow like this. We get another solid climb here, but the cloud bases are a bit low, and we've got some ground to cover to the next clouds. These clouds are closest, and they look decent, but I've got my eye on this one. It's the tallest cloud around, and it's got a dark bottom. It's also almost directly in line with my intended course, which will take me up onto the Sierras. I keep my speed up, and I don't mind if I arrive a bit low. I'm expecting a strong climb out of this cloud, and if my gamble doesn't pay off, I've got the runway at Bridgeport right beneath me. This is actually a group of clouds joined together, and there's going to be multiple cores feeding them. It takes a bit of hunting to find a strong core, but I eventually do and get a nice long climb. We arrive at the Sierra Nevada mountain range. The clouds ahead don't look so great, but as usual there's some convergence going on here, and there's no need to slow down. After going for a while without a climb, I spot a small cloud that's growing quickly. Whenever you're faced with mediocre clouds ahead, it really pays to watch for newly forming ones. Speaking of mediocre clouds, there are more ahead, but we're still on a convergence line, and despite our high cruising speed, we lose only 111 feet in 29 kilometers. We follow the convergence line back onto the Sierras. Despite the high cloud bases, we're no longer high above the ground. The terrain here is rugged and beautiful, and a bit intimidating. I do not like to get low in this area, so I take a weaker climb to stay high. In my experience, this area is usually pretty weak. Maybe it's because of the snow on the mountains, but I don't expect to find any good climbs ahead. We're going to run to the end of these clouds and turn around. Philip and I diverge a bit here, but we'll come back together soon. We've gone a while without a climb, but we haven't slowed down. We're getting pretty close to those jagged mountain tops, but Mammoth Airport is right ahead in the valley, and we're about to leave the mountains to head northeast. We take a short but unnecessary climb before we cross a blue gap to some really good-looking clouds. We shift into high gear, and with the help of a tailwind are making 121 knots over the ground. Now we're getting into the good stuff. We're entering the peak afternoon hours. We're at the beginning of a 348-kilometer downwind run on a continuous cloud street. This downwind run was comprised of legs 2 and 3 of the flight. Leg 2 was 118 kilometers, which we covered at 156 kilometers per hour average cross-country speed. Leg 3 was 231 kilometers at 161 kilometers per hour. That was a really fun and really fast run, but it took over 2 hours, so I'm going to skip ahead a bit. We flew up the Toyabe Range, past Austin, and about halfway to Eureka before we turned around. This is the furthest east I've ever flown in Nevada, by a large margin. This is all new terrain for me. At this point, we've flown across half the state of Nevada. But it's already 4 o'clock, and it's time to head home. Our upwind leg won't be quite as fast. We make the decision to turn around, which is hard to do when things are going so well. It's getting a little rainy to the north on our right side, but the way we came still looks pretty good. But we're finding that even the good-looking clouds are yielding weak climbs, and we're really getting blown downwind now. As we get back towards the Austin area, we see that it's raining over the Austin airport on the left. Austin's our only airport in range, but I'd really hate to be landing there in the rain and risk getting caught in a microburst. The climbs continue to be weak, and they don't go all the way up to cloud base. It seems like we turned around maybe a half hour too late. As I fly past the Austin airport, I notice that there's absolutely nothing around. Being forced to land there would not be fun. If I get low enough that I'm forced to turn toward the airport, it's game over. I'm not likely to find a climb in the dark and the rain over there. I'm still several thousand feet above the ground, but I'm more than 5,000 feet below cloud base, and that's going to make finding a thermal hard. When you're this far below cloud base, it makes it hard to judge where the core is going to be in relation to the cloud. It may be tilting quite a bit due to the wind, and it is windy right now. I'm down below 12,000 feet MSL now, which is about 6,000 feet below cloud base. Philip's about 1,000 feet higher than me, but we're both getting a bit desperate here. Hopefully this cloud ahead will work. We finally find something worth climbing in, and take it up almost to cloud base. Things are looking much better in our immediate future. It's time to switch back into high gear. Another solid climb puts us above 17,000 again, and we're feeling fat and happy. However, there are some rain clouds looming in the distance. They look like they're around the Hawthorne area, but it looks like we can go around them to the left. That shouldn't be a problem, although it's going to add distance and make us arrive later at Minden. Hopefully we can get on final glide before the lift dies. Just then I run into the best climb of the day, peaking at over 10 knots at times. This fills me with optimism and confidence. I'm thinking we're going to be back at Minden in about an hour. This convergence line is cooking. I'm flying fast and barely losing any altitude. As I work my way to the southwest, the ground starts to get a little darker. But I'm still high, and I'm thinking there'll be a climb under some of this overdevelopment. There usually is. As I approach the Hawthorne area, I realize that I haven't found a climb in quite a while, and the clouds ahead don't look so good anymore. Philip is ahead of me, and he's already taken a line more to the left, where there's more sun on the ground. Belatedly, I make the same decision. This line takes me further away from Hawthorne, which is the only airport in range right now. The clouds ahead are pretty shallow, but there is direct sun on the ground, so I figure there's going to be something working over here. Well, not so much. I turn west, toward what now looks like my last hope. If these clouds aren't working, there's nothing else. I'm going to have to land at Hawthorne. Minden's somewhere over here, behind all the rain. The sun is getting low in the sky, and the sunlight reaching the ground is getting dimmed by the clouds. That's not good. Philip is low too, but he's far ahead of me now, and he's closer to breaking out into the area where there's more sun on the ground. I don't think I'm going to make it there. I'm approaching the ridge south of Hawthorne. I can't go beyond it, because then I'll lose glide to Hawthorne and have nowhere to land. There are a few patches of sunlight on this ridge, which may be my last chance to find a thermal before I have to land at Hawthorne. Even if I could get back to Cloud Base here, I'm not sure I'd be able to make it to Minden, but at least I'd be able to land a little bit closer and have a shorter retrieve. This little plateau on top of the ridge looks promising. There's some sunlight on it. There's nothing here. I start dumping my water ballast, as I've given up hope of finding a strong thermal again. Well, I guess this is going to be my first landing at Hawthorne. It's a big paved runway and there's a town nearby, so it could be worse. I'd better get out my phone and look up the frequencies for the AWAS and CTAF.
2990 inches of mercury were marked. Density altitude 7400.
Wait a minute. What's this?
Hawthorne Industrial Airport, automated weather.
This thermal starts out weak, but improves as I get higher. It doesn't get me to Cloud Base, but it gets me above 12,000, and now I have some breathing room to find another thermal. I backtrack the way I came to get somewhere where there's sunlight on the ground. That's my only hope of finding a climb, and I'll take anything I can get at this point. I find another weak one and squeeze a few more 100 feet out of it. Meanwhile, Philip has managed to find a climb and is now attempting a final glide to Minden. He's not much higher than me, but he is flying a JS-3, so maybe he has a chance. I'm slowly scratching my way back up to Cloud Base, bit by bit. I can hardly believe this is working. I thought I was done for. To my great surprise, I make it to almost 18,000 feet. Minden is still 84 miles away, and it's already 7 p.m. To make it back to Minden, I would need to make a 40-to-1 final glide. That's right on the edge of what I could realistically achieve over such a long distance, and I have to fly through a sky that's dark and rainy. It's pretty unlikely that I'll be finding any more climbs, so I'm going to have to work with the altitude I have now. I'm happy to find that I have a tailwind of 8 knots, but I know that when I get lower it's going to turn into a headwind, as the prevailing winds are from the west, near Minden. Philip reports on the radio that he now has final glide to Minden. That's reassuring. I know he'll hop in my car and come get me if necessary. I'm sure everyone else has gone home already. I may still have a chance to get to Minden. My required glide ratio is only 33-to-1 now, but my computer says I need another 1,900 feet to clear the mountain. I may be able to go around it, but it's hard to judge that. The sun is about to go behind the mountains, although official sunset will not be for another 40 minutes or so. As a VFR aircraft, I'm legally required to land before sunset. I fly through a little burble and do a circle or two to try to gain some more altitude, but I only end up losing about 75 feet. And now I'm seeing the headwind I was expecting. I just need a few hundred more feet to get over this mountain. Maybe I can find a thermal in these foothills. I guess not. I have just enough altitude to try one more thing before I have to go back and land at Topaz. I see a small ridge that's facing into the sun and the wind. Maybe I can pick up a little ridge lift here, or even a thermal. If this doesn't work, I'm going to have to turn left over the ridge and fly down into the valley to Topaz. There's a little something here. No, I'm just barely maintaining altitude. As long as I'm not losing altitude, I can keep trying. Okay, I'm kind of learning where the hot spots are in this ridge. If I can stay in them, maybe I can gain a little altitude. Once I zero in on where the best lift is, I slowly begin climbing. I've managed to gain about 300 feet on this ridge, but the lift is petering out. I'm not climbing anymore. I don't have the altitude to comfortably make it to Minden, especially considering the headwind. But I do have Pine Nut Airport comfortably in glide, which is between here and Minden. I carefully make a visual judgment as to whether or not I can make it over the low hills in front of me. If I can clear these hills, and I think I can safely make it to Pine Nut Airport. I've cleared the hills in front of me, and I'm definitely going to make Pine Nut Airport now. To my surprise, the air in the valley here is slightly netto positive, and the headwind is almost negligible. Oh my god, I think I'm going to make it to Minden. I can hardly believe it. The sun is going to officially set in 8 minutes. There's no time to waste. I've got to fly a fast pattern and get on the ground as soon as possible. Wow, I can't believe I made it back. There were so many points in this flight that seemed dire and hopeless, but I never gave up. As long as I was within the bounds of my personal safety minimums, I kept fighting. Philip and I thought this would be an 800-kilometer flight, but for me it ended up being 958 kilometers, and for him it was 990. So close to 1,000 kilometers. But the real accomplishment today was persevering against all odds. At the end of the day, that's more satisfying than doing a longer but easier flight. Thanks for watching. See you next time.